The universe is not impressed by how confident you sound. It does not care about titles, degrees, or traditions. It only responds to one thing, whether you actually understand what's going on. Understanding the universe is not about collecting facts like trophies. It's about tearing ideas apart until nothing fake survives. Most people confuse knowing words with knowing things. They can name a phenomenon, define it, even teach it. Yet the moment you ask, why does it behave this way, silence appears. That silence is the border between memorization and understanding. To truly understand anything, you must be willing to look stupid first. You must ask questions that sound childish, simple, even embarrassing. Because nature does not reward sophistication, it rewards accuracy. If something is true, it will survive questioning. If it's false, it deserves to die. And here's the uncomfortable part. Authority means nothing to reality. An idea isn't correct because a famous person said it. It's correct because repeated experiments agree with it. When theory and experiment disagree, the theory loses every time. That's humility at the scale of the universe understanding. Also demands brutal honesty with yourself. If you cannot explain an idea in plain language, you do not own it. Complex jargon does not equal depth. It often hides confusion. Clarity is not simplicity for the weak. Clarity is simplicity earned through hard thinking. Another thing most people fear: uncertainty. They want final answers, permanent conclusions, mental comfort. But the universe doesn't work that way. Not knowing is not a failure. Pretending to know is. Progress comes from standing at the edge of ignorance and leaning forward, not from building fake certainty to feel safe. Curiosity is not passive interest. It is an aggressive desire to understand how things really work, even when the answer threatens your beliefs. And maybe the most important idea of all, understanding the universe should be joyful. Wonder is not separate from rigor. You can be precise without becoming dull. You can be serious without killing curiosity. The universe is not just a machine to analyze. It is a mystery that invites exploration, rewards honesty, and punishes intellectual laziness. If you want to understand it, don't worship ideas. Don't fear questions. Don't hide behind complexity. Ask, test, explain, repeat. That is how the universe reveals itself, not to the loudest voice, but to the most curious mind. Understanding beats memorization. Memorization is cheap. Anyone can memorize. A parrot can memorize. A hard drive can store more facts than any human who has ever lived. If memorization were intelligence, Google would be the smartest mind on earth. But it isn't, because knowing information is not the same as knowing reality. Understanding means something very different. Understanding means you can take an idea apart, turn it upside down, break, rebuild it, and still recognize it. It means the knowledge lives in your mind, not just on your tongue. When memorization fails, and it always does under pressure, understanding survives. Most education systems train people to repeat answers, not to ask questions. Students learn formulas without knowing where they came from. They learn laws without knowing why nature obeys them. They learn conclusions without ever touching the reasoning that produced them. This creates an illusion of knowledge, impressive on exams, useless in real thinking. The universe does not reward memorization. It rewards insight. You can memorize every equation about motion and still have no idea why something falls. You can recite definitions of energy and still not understand what energy is. When memorized knowledge meets a new problem, one not seen before, it collapses. Understanding adapts. Understanding transfers. Understanding creates. Real understanding begins the moment you say, "I don't get this yet." That sentence scares people because it exposes ignorance. But ignorance exposed is the first step toward truth. Ignorance hidden behind memorized words is permanent. If you truly understand something, you can explain it without hiding behind technical language. Jargon is not intelligence. It's often camouflage. Simplicity is not dumbing down. It is distillation. It takes far more mental effort to explain an idea clearly than to repeat it in complicated terms. Clarity is proof of ownership. Nature itself is brutally honest. It does not care how elegant your explanation sounds. It only responds to what actually works. You can memorize theories all day long, but one failed experiment is enough to expose the gap between knowing and understanding. Understanding also demands courage. It requires questioning what everyone else accepts. It requires the willingness to doubt books, teachers, traditions, not out of arrogance, but out of respect for truth. Progress has never come from obedient repetition. It has always come from someone asking an uncomfortable why. Memorization creates followers. Understanding creates thinkers. A memorized mind looks for instructions. An understanding mind looks for patterns. When something unexpected happens, the memorized mind panics. The understanding mind becomes curious. Curiosity is not a personality trait. It is a habit built by refusing to accept shallow answers. There is also joy in understanding, a deep, quiet satisfaction that memorization can never give. Memorization is mechanical. Understanding feels like suddenly seeing the picture after staring at scattered pieces. It is the moment confusion turns into clarity. That moment is addictive, and it is the engine of all discovery, but understanding is uncomfortable because it exposes how little you truly know. The deeper you go, the larger ignorance becomes. This frightens people who want certainty, final answers, and intellectual safety. But certainty is not a requirement for intelligence. Honesty is. To understand the universe, you must accept uncertainty as permanent. The goal is not to eliminate mystery, but to reduce confusion. Every answer opens better questions. That is not a flaw. That is how knowledge grows. Memorization asks, what should I remember? Understanding asks, why must it be this way and not another? That single shift changes everything. When you understand, you are no longer dependent on authority. You don't need someone to tell you what to think. You can test ideas against reality yourself. This is intellectual independence, and it is rare because it is demanding. Understanding takes time. It takes effort. It takes failure. You will be wrong many times. But being wrong while thinking is infinitely better than being correct by repetition. One builds insight. The other builds fragility. In the end, the universe is not a textbook to be memorized. It is a system to be explored. It speaks in patterns, not definitions. It rewards those who listen carefully, question deeply, and refuse to settle for surface-level explanations. Understanding beats memorization because memorization ends where learning should begin. And anyone serious about truth knows this. Facts fade. Definitions change, but understanding, once earned, becomes a tool you can use forever. Question everything, especially the obvious. The most dangerous ideas are not the ones that sound strange. They are the ones that sound so familiar that no one thinks to challenge them. The obvious is comfortable. It feels safe. It feels settled. And that is exactly why it deserves suspicion. Progress does not begin by attacking the unknown. It begins by re-examining what everyone assumes is already understood. Most people live inside borrowed conclusions. They inherit explanations the way they inherit language, without remembering when or why they accepted them. Once an idea becomes common, it stops being questioned. Once it stops being questioned, it stops being examined. And the moment examination ends, thinking ends. The universe does not label anything as obvious. That label exists only in the human mind. Nature simply behaves the way it does. When something feels obvious, it usually means we have grown accustomed to it, not that we have understood it. Familiarity is not evidence of truth. Repetition is not proof. Questioning the obvious is uncomfortable because it threatens stability. It forces you to admit that what you know might be incomplete or worse, wrong. That discomfort is not a weakness. It is the price of intellectual honesty. Every meaningful discovery has required someone to tolerate that discomfort longer than others were willing to. The obvious often survives not because it is correct, but because it is convenient. It fits into existing beliefs. It reduces mental effort. It avoids conflict. But convenience has no relationship with reality. The universe does not simplify itself to protect our comfort. When you stop questioning the obvious, you stop learning. You begin defending ideas instead of testing them. You confuse familiarity with understanding. At that point, knowledge becomes fragile. It works only as long as nothing unexpected happens. True questioning is not rebellion for its own sake. It is not cynicism. It is not disrespect. It is curiosity paired with discipline. To question something properly, you must be willing to follow the answer wherever it leads, even if it contradicts your expectations. The obvious collapses quickly under honest questioning. Ask where an idea came from. Ask what assumptions it depends on. Ask what evidence supports it and what evidence could destroy it. If an idea cannot survive those questions, it does not deserve your confidence. Children ask powerful questions because they have not yet learned what they are not supposed to question. Over time, that instinct is trained out of them. Society rewards obedience more than curiosity. Exams reward correct answers, not good questions. Slowly, questioning becomes a risk instead of a habit. But the universe does not care what you were taught not to question. It only cares about what is true. Many of history's biggest mistakes were built on obvious ideas. Ideas so accepted that no one thought to test them. Once questioned, they collapsed quickly, revealing not stupidity, but complacency. Intelligence is not the absence of error. It is the refusal to protect error from examination. Questioning the obvious also reveals hidden complexity. What appears simple is often layered with assumptions. When you peel those layers back, you discover mechanisms, constraints, and patterns that were invisible before. That is where understanding deepens. There is also humility in questioning. It reminds you that your perspective is limited, that your experience is not universal, that certainty should always be provisional. This humility is not passive. It sharpens perception. It keeps the mind flexible. Some people fear that constant questioning leads to chaos. It does not. Blind acceptance leads to chaos. Questioning is what builds reliable knowledge. Structures that cannot survive questioning were never stable to begin with. When you question the obvious, you regain ownership of your thinking. You stop outsourcing judgment to authority. You stop mistaking consensus for truth. You begin interacting directly with reality, not second-hand interpretations of it. This does not mean rejecting everything. It means earning belief instead of inheriting it. It means holding ideas tentatively, ready to adjust them when evidence demands it. Strength of mind is not stubbornness. It is adaptability. The obvious is seductive because it feels complete, but completeness is an illusion. The universe is deeper than first impressions. Every surface explanation hides better questions underneath. Questioning everything does not make life harder. It makes it clearer. Confusion decreases as assumptions are exposed. Thinking becomes cleaner, sharper, more precise. In the end, questioning the obvious is not about being different. It is about being accurate. Reality does not reward agreement. It rewards those who ask the right questions and refuse to stop at comfortable answers. The obvious is where most people stop. That is exactly why it is where serious thinking begins. Nature doesn't care about your opinions. It never has, and it never will. The universe does not listen to arguments, intentions, or confidence. It does not adjust itself to fit beliefs, traditions, or personal preferences. It operates by rules that exist independently of what anyone thinks about them. You may dislike those rules, misunderstand them, or deny them entirely, and nothing will change. Opinion is cheap because it costs nothing to hold. Reality is expensive because it demands evidence. You can argue endlessly about how something should work, but nature responds only to how it does work. When belief and reality collide, reality wins without explanation or apology. This is why experiments matter. Not because scientists enjoy complexity, but because nature refuses to answer to words. It answers only to tests. A theory is not validated by how logical it sounds or how many people agree with it. It is validated by whether nature behaves the way the theory predicts. One failed prediction is enough to expose an error, no matter how elegant the idea. Human history is full of confident opinions that reality crushed. People once believed heavier objects fell faster than lighter ones. It felt obvious. It matched intuition. Nature disagreed. No amount of arguing could convince gravity to cooperate with opinion. Only observation forced correction. Nature is brutally fair. It treats all ideas equally by testing them. It shows no favoritism to authority, tradition, or popularity. An unknown thinker with a correct model will always outperform a famous thinker with a wrong one. Truth is not a vote. This indifference is not cruelty. It is clarity. Because nature does not care, it provides a reliable standard. Personal bias cannot bend it. Emotional attachment cannot soften it. This makes nature the ultimate referee in every intellectual dispute. The danger begins when people confuse explanation with control. Naming something does not grant power over it. Describing a law does not make it optional. Understanding is not command, it is alignment. You do not tell the universe what to do. You learn what it does and work with it. Opinions feel powerful because they are internal. They create certainty without effort. But that certainty is fragile. The moment it is tested against reality, it either adapts or shatters. Refusing to test opinions does not protect them. It merely delays failure. Reality has no obligation to be intuitive. Many truths feel wrong at first. They contradict common sense. They challenge everyday experience. This is not because nature is strange. It is because human intuition evolved for survival, not accuracy. When intuition conflicts with evidence, intuition must yield. Nature also does not explain itself. It does not offer comfort or meaning. It simply behaves. Any understanding we gain is earned through careful observation, measurement, and repeated testing. This makes knowledge slow, difficult, and incredibly valuable. Respecting nature's indifference is a form of intellectual maturity. It forces humility. It reminds you that being convinced is not the same as being correct. It teaches restraint, to wait for evidence before forming conclusions, and to remain willing to abandon them when evidence changes. This attitude extends beyond science. In any system governed by reality, economics, engineering, health, technology, opinions detached from evidence fail. Bridges collapse, markets crash, bodies break. Reality enforces its rules without debate. Nature does not punish ignorance out of malice. It simply reveals it. Failure is not personal. It is informational. It shows where understanding ends and assumption begins. Those who learn from this adjust. Those who argue with reality repeat the same mistakes. There is freedom in accepting that nature does not care. It removes the burden of defending beliefs. It shifts focus from being right to finding out. It replaces ego with curiosity. Instead of asking, "Do I believe this?" you ask, "Does it work?" Progress depends on this mindset. Every advance comes from submitting ideas to reality and accepting the outcome even when it disappoints. This is not submission in a weak sense. It is alignment with the only judge that cannot be fooled. In the end, opinions are stories we tell ourselves. Nature is the story that continues whether we listen or not. Understanding grows when we stop trying to persuade the universe and start paying attention to it. Nature doesn't care about your opinions, and that is precisely why it can teach you the truth. If you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it. That statement sounds harsh, but it is precise. Complexity often feels impressive, yet it is usually the refuge of confusion. When an idea is truly understood, it becomes flexible. It can be reshaped, translated, and expressed in different forms without losing its meaning. When it is not understood, it becomes rigid, dependent on exact wording, formulas, or jargon to survive. Many people mistake difficult language for deep thinking. They hide behind technical terms, not because the idea requires them, but because they themselves are unsure what the idea actually means. Complicated explanations can create the illusion of intelligence, but illusion collapses the moment clarity is demanded. Simplicity is not the absence of depth, it is the result of depth. To explain something simply, you must see its structure clearly. You must know what is essential and what is decoration. You must understand cause and effect, not just labels and outcomes. This takes work. It takes struggling with the idea until it becomes transparent. A memorized explanation cannot be simplified. It breaks if you try. An understood idea can be rebuilt from scratch. You can start from first principles, use analogies, draw examples, and still arrive at the same conclusion. That is how you know the idea is yours. The test of understanding is transfer. Can you apply the idea in a new situation? Can you teach it to someone without assuming prior knowledge? Can you answer unexpected questions without panicking? If the answer is no, then the knowledge is incomplete. Simplicity also exposes flaws. When you try to explain something clearly, gaps appear. Assumptions become visible. Weak reasoning reveals itself. This is uncomfortable, which is why many avoid simplifying. It forces confrontation with what you do not yet understand. The universe itself is not complicated in expression. It is precise in behavior. The laws that govern it are simple in form, even if their consequences are rich and complex. Complexity emerges from simple rules interacting, not from vague or mystical explanations. Clear explanations respect the listener. They assume intelligence, not prior expertise. They invite engagement rather than intimidation. Confusion does not make an idea more true, it only makes it less accessible. There is also honesty in simplicity. It prevents exaggeration. It prevents hiding uncertainty behind fancy words. When something is not fully understood, simplicity forces you to say, "This part is still unclear." That admission is not weakness, it is accuracy. Education fails when it rewards repetition instead of explanation. Students learn to recite without understanding. They pass exams yet cannot explain what they have learned in their own words. This creates fragile knowledge that disappears under pressure. True understanding creates confidence, not arrogance. You do not need to dominate a conversation or impress an audience. You can explain calmly, clearly, and adapt to the listener. You are not protecting the idea, you are sharing it. Simplicity is also a tool for discovery. When you try to simplify an idea, you often discover better questions. You strip away unnecessary detail and see the core problem more clearly. This leads to deeper insight. The fear of oversimplification is often exaggerated. Oversimplification removes truth. True simplicity preserves it. The difference lies in understanding. Without understanding, simplification distorts. With understanding, it clarifies. In any field, the best thinkers are the clearest communicators, not because they aim to be popular, but because clarity is the natural byproduct of deep comprehension. They know what matters and what does not. If you want to know whether you truly understand something, try to explain to a curious child or to yourself without notes. If you stumble, if you rely on memorized phrases, if the explanation collapses, the work is not finished. Understanding is not proven by how much you can say. It is proven by how little you need to say without losing meaning. If you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it. Not yet. And that yet is an invitation to think harder, dig deeper, and earn clarity instead of performing intelligence. Uncertainty is not weakness, it's intellectual honesty. The desire for certainty is one of the strongest human instincts. We want clear answers, fixed conclusions, and solid ground beneath our thinking. Certainty feels safe, it feels like control. But the universe does not offer that kind of comfort. It offers evidence, probabilities, patterns, and a constant reminder that our understanding is always incomplete. Pretending to be certain does not make you intelligent, it makes you rigid. Intellectual weakness is not saying, "I don't know." Intellectual weakness is being afraid to say it. The moment you claim absolute certainty, you stop listening. You stop testing, you stop learning, you replace curiosity with defense, and defense has never discovered anything new. Honest thinking begins where confidence ends. It begins with the recognition that every explanation is provisional, useful, but not sacred. Reality does not reveal itself all at once. It reveals itself slowly, through error, correction, and refinement. Certainty blocks that process. Uncertainty keeps it alive. Many people treat doubt as a flaw, as something to be eliminated. In truth, doubt is a tool. It keeps ideas flexible. It forces them to face evidence repeatedly. Without doubt, beliefs harden into dogma, and dogma resists reality instead of learning from it. The universe is not built on final answers. It is built on patterns that work until they don't. Every law, every model, every explanation has limits. Acknowledging those limits is not surrender, it is accuracy. Ignoring them is arrogance. Uncertainty also separates belief from evidence. Belief demands commitment. Evidence demands attention. When you admit uncertainty, you shift from defending ideas to investigating them. That shift is the foundation of progress. There is a difference between being confused and being uncertain. Confusion is lack of understanding. Uncertainty is understanding the boundaries of your knowledge. One is temporary ignorance. The other is intellectual maturity. History rewards those who were comfortable being uncertain. Every major advancement came from someone willing to admit that existing explanations were incomplete. They did not destroy certainty recklessly. They questioned it carefully. That care made discovery possible. People often mistake confidence for competence. A confident voice can sound convincing even when it is wrong. Nature is not impressed by confidence. It responds only to what is correct. Uncertainty, paired with testing, is far more reliable than confidence without evidence. Living with uncertainty requires courage. It means resisting the urge to close questions prematurely. It means tolerating ambiguity while continuing to think clearly. This is difficult, which is why certainty is so tempting. But temptation is not a guide to truth. Uncertainty also protects against self-deception. When you accept that you may be wrong, you are more likely to notice errors. You become alert instead of defensive. You trade pride for precision. Some fear that uncertainty leads to indecision. In reality, it leads to better decisions. Acting with awareness of uncertainty encourages caution, adaptation, and revision. Acting with false certainty encourages recklessness. Intellectual honesty demands that you distinguish between what you know, what you think you know, and what you do not know. Blurring those categories creates confusion. Respecting them creates clarity. The strongest thinkers are not those with the loudest conclusions, but those with the sharpest questions. They move forward without pretending the road is finished. They revise without shame. They abandon ideas without regret when evidence demands it. Uncertainty does not paralyze progress. It guides it. It tells you where to look next. It tells you which assumptions need testing. It keeps thought dynamic. To understand the universe is not to eliminate mystery, but to engage with it honestly. Every answer opens deeper questions. That is not failure. That is success. Certainty ends conversation. Uncertainty begins discovery. Uncertainty is not weakness. It is respect for reality. It is the discipline of admitting what the evidence allows and nothing more.
Every time you seek approval, your worth becomes a hostage to someone else's opinion. And the strange thing is, the more you try to please the world, the more the world ignores you. Life begins to lose its brightness when you live to be seen instead of living to understand. Now imagine just for a moment that all the energy you spend trying to be accepted was redirected into learning, into exploring, into understanding how things truly work. Imagine the power that would have. You'd start to see the hidden beauty in simple things, in sound, in light, in ideas, in people. Because true genius isn't born from the desire to be admired, but from curiosity. That pure restlessness that makes you want to discover why things are the way they are. And when you dive into that curiosity, life starts to flow in a way that no ambition can ever reproduce. The truth is, the pursuit of recognition is a trap disguised as motivation. It pushes you to run faster, to work harder, to achieve more, yet it never lets you rest. It's a bottomless pit, and you know what's at the bottom of that pit? Nothing but emptiness. The emptiness of someone who lived to be remembered instead of living to understand. So listen closely. Living for the love of understanding is the only path that truly sets you free. Because the pleasure of discovering is the reward itself. And the one who learns for the joy of learning never needs applause. Pay attention to me now, because what I'm about to tell you might completely change the way you see life. You've spent far too long trying to be recognized, trying to prove something to others. And without realizing it, you became a prisoner of that need. But let me tell you this. Most of the people who seem to be winning are actually losing silently. They collect titles, possessions, praise, yet they lose something invisible, their inner freedom. They live like actors on a stage, playing a role the world wrote for them. But you know the problem? When the curtain falls, there's only silence. And in that silence, the question no one wants to face appears. Why am I doing all this? If your reason is to be recognized, you'll never rest. Because recognition is volatile. It shifts with people's moods, with trends, with the tides. One day they applaud you, the next they forget you. And if your worth depends on that, you're doomed to rise and fall with the world around you. But when you do something for the simple joy of understanding, something inside you changes. Suddenly time moves differently. You stop chasing, and you start being guided by something deeper. Curiosity. Curiosity is the engine of life. It turns boredom into discovery, pain into learning, chaos into meaning. When you follow that energy, you no longer need recognition, because the pursuit itself becomes fulfilling. It's the joy of understanding what lies behind things, of seeing how everything connects. That is true power. When you learn for the love of comprehension, the entire world opens before you. You stop being an actor, and you become the author. And for the first time, life starts to make sense. But to reach that point, you must do something few ever dare. Stop trying to be someone and start trying to understand something. The difference seems small, but it's enormous. The first path enslaves you, the second one sets you free. Pay attention to me now, because I want to take you to a place where very few have the courage to look. People think freedom means being able to do whatever they want, but that's just the reflection of modern ignorance. True freedom is being able to think whatever you want, to doubt what you've been taught, and to allow yourself not to know. A mind that seeks recognition is enslaved by certainty. A mind that seeks understanding is free to explore. Do you want to know what truly destroys genius? The need to appear intelligent. The person who tries to look smart for others will never be truly intelligent, because they're focused on displaying, not discovering. Genius is born the moment you abandon the desire to be special and embrace the joy of uncovering the obvious. Think about it. Everything you know was once obvious to someone who had the courage to look closely. The difference between the mediocre and the brilliant doesn't lie in talent. It lies in genuine curiosity. The mediocre wants to be right. The brilliant wants to learn, even if it means stripping away their own vanity. And here's the irony. The more you care about what others think, the less you actually think for yourself. A curious mind is like a child taking apart a toy just to see what's inside. It doesn't crave status. It doesn't want applause. It wants the mystery. It wants the why. And that's what keeps the inner fire alive. The sincere desire to understand the world before the world understands you. Life becomes light when you realize you don't need to impress anyone. You begin to do things for the simple pleasure of seeing what happens. And strangely enough, that's when everything starts to work. When you stop chasing results, the results begin to chase you. Because the universe responds to genuine curiosity, not to empty ambition. The secret isn't to be recognized, it's to be so deeply immersed in the process that recognition becomes irrelevant. The reward lies in the very act of understanding. And those who live that way exist in a state of freedom that money and status could never buy. Now imagine something uncomfortable yet necessary. What if most of human suffering didn't come from lack, but from excess? The excess of wanting, proving, showing. The world taught you that ambition is a virtue, but forgot to warn you that blind ambition is poison. You run, you exhaust yourself, you achieve, and when you finally arrive where you always wanted to be, you realize there's no one there, not even you. People confuse purpose with performance. They crave meaning, yet spend their days trying to win a race they never chose to run. They long for freedom, yet choose paths that chain them. The pursuit of status, applause, validation. And the worst part? They believe they're evolving, when in truth, they're only moving further away from themselves. Let me tell you something few have the courage to face. Success without understanding is just another form of failure. Because if you don't understand what you're doing, success becomes an accident. And accidents don't set you free. They enslave you. When you act only for the result becomes your master. But when you act for the love of understanding, you are in control, and life begins to flow again. There is no purer pleasure than the pleasure of truly understanding. When you truly understand, there's no need to compete. There's no envy, no rush, no comparison. There's only a curious silence. That rare moment when everything makes sense for just a few seconds, and you feel part of something far greater than ambition itself. The problem is most people want to understand the world, but they don't want to understand themselves. They crave answers, but can't stand questions. And that's why they live tired, anxious, and empty. Because they try to fill what is spiritual with what is material. They try to buy, conquer, or prove what can only be understood. Life is not a podium. It's a laboratory. You're not here to win. You're here to discover. And when you understand that, you realize the whole game changes. It stops being a competition and becomes an investigation. Every mistake becomes a clue. Every failure, a new hypothesis. And that's how you begin to free yourself. Not by winning, but by understanding. When a human being finally lets go of the need for recognition, something extraordinary happens. They are reborn. The mind becomes light, the heart becomes quiet, and for the first time they begin to taste real freedom. Suddenly fear disappears, the fear of failing, of being judged, of not being enough. Because now none of that matters. You no longer live to prove, you live to experience. And in that moment, life starts to align with who you truly are. Opportunities appear, ideas flow, the right people come closer, because you stopped being a copy begging for acceptance and become an authentic source of energy and creation. Authenticity has a power the modern world has forgotten. When you are real, the entire universe seems to recognize you in a way applause never could. Life begins to conspire in your favor, because at last you're playing the right game, the game of growing from within. And everything that once seemed difficult begins to happen naturally, because when your focus shifts from appearing to understanding, you connect to the natural flow of things. You don't force, you simply are. Do you want to know what true peace feels like? It's waking up one day and realizing you don't need to impress anyone, that you are enough simply for being here, learning, failing, trying to understand. And from that moment on, every gesture, every word, every small discovery starts to have meaning. You begin to see beauty where you once saw routine. You begin to see purpose where you once saw haste. Lightness is born when vanity dies. And the pleasure of discovery becomes greater than any achievement. Life flows, not because you control it, but because you understand it. And once you understand, you no longer need to run. You realize that what truly matters is not what others think of you, but what the universe reveals when you finally choose to listen. Now write this in the comments. With conviction, I choose the freedom of understanding. This phrase will begin to reprogram your subconscious, reminding your mind every day of what truly matters. From today on, make yourself a promise. Live for the love of understanding, not for ambition. Stop chasing recognition and start seeking meaning. That is the key that changes everything. If this message touched you, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the bell, because what's coming next will expand your mind even more. And remember, to understand is to be free, and the one who becomes free inspires the world, without needing to say a single word. The fastest way to learn is not by memorizing, but by playing with ideas until they feel natural. Try to explain them out loud as if you were teaching a child. If you need to memorize, it's because you haven't understood. And if you haven't understood, you haven't learned. This method is a trap. You might be able to repeat words, but you won't truly understand anything. And when an exam, or life itself, demands that you use that knowledge, it simply won't be there. But here's the secret. Whenever you learn something new, don't be satisfied with just storing it in your head. Speak it out loud. Explain it. Teach it. If there's no one around, teach it to yourself. Talk to yourself in your room, in the car, while you walk, even in the shower. Turn thoughts into words. When you can speak clearly and naturally, as if you were explaining it to someone else, that's when the knowledge becomes yours. Listen carefully. There's one infallible sign that someone truly understands an idea: the ability to make it simple. Anyone can hide behind complicated words, but only those who really understand can explain with clarity. Let me put it clearly. If you can't explain it simply, you haven't understood it. Repeating complex terms might impress the uninformed, but it doesn't fool reality. If you can't simplify it, you don't master it. When a concept still feels confusing, tangled with too many loose details, the problem isn't the subject itself. The problem is how you organized it in your mind. But when you can take that same concept and translate it into direct, logical, and accessible words, then you've reached true understanding. And here's the central point. Simplicity doesn't weaken knowledge, it strengthens it. The simpler it is, the more essential. The more essential, the more unforgettable. Information stops being a burden you carry and becomes a tool you can use anytime. That's why the greatest scientists, philosophers, and geniuses always sought clarity. They knew the mind doesn't need to drown in complexity. The mind needs to see the structure. When you learn to do this, you don't just understand better, you never forget. That is the path of real learning, not accumulating words, but distilling until only what matters remains. Every time you explain something, you strengthen your mind. It's like a muscle that doesn't grow at rest, but under challenge. Explaining is that challenge. It forces the brain to organize, review, connect, and test what it has learned. Think about it. When you only read or listen, you're in a passive position. It's as if information flows through you without taking root. But when you force yourself to teach, even if it's only to yourself, your mind changes gears. You leave the passive mode and enter the active one. You're no longer just receiving, you're producing, creating clarity. And here's the magic. In this process, the brain reveals what you still don't understand. If you get stuck, if you can't explain a detail, that means you've uncovered a gap in your knowledge. And that's wonderful, because now you know exactly where to improve. You're no longer in the dark. At the same time, every time you manage to explain something clearly, something powerful happens. The knowledge sticks. It takes deep root. It stops being a temporary visitor and becomes a permanent part of your mental structure. That's why, once you explain something well, you'll rarely forget it afterward. This cycle, learn, explain, correct, and fix, is what accelerates your growth in any area. The more often you repeat it, the stronger your mind becomes. It's like training every day. With discipline, you reach results that seem impossible to those who never practice. And this is exactly how the greatest thinkers reached the level of genius. They didn't memorize, they didn't pile up dead information. They turned explanation into their training ground. And with every explanation, they became faster, clearer, and deeper. Now, I want you to understand something fundamental. This method shouldn't be used only once in a while. It must become a daily habit. The secret isn't in long study sessions, but in constant repetition, in training your mind during small intervals. You don't need hours of absolute silence or perfect conditions. On the contrary, great learners use any moment. If you're waiting for a bus, explain quietly what you just studied. If you're walking, teach yourself the concept you learned earlier that morning. If you're alone in your room, speak out loud as if you were giving a lesson. These stolen minutes of the day are hidden treasures. Most people waste them getting lost in useless distractions. You, however, can use them as a training ground for your brain. It's in these moments that knowledge solidifies, because you're not just reviewing, you're organizing and simplifying. But understand this, you don't need to be perfect. Many times you'll stumble, forget, get stuck, and that's exactly where the power lies. Those stumbles reveal the gaps you still need to strengthen. With each attempt, you come back sharper, clearer, more confident. When this becomes a habit, something extraordinary happens. You start to think differently. Your mind becomes trained to seek clarity in everything. You begin to organize ideas automatically, to separate the essential from the unnecessary, to communicate better without effort. And all of this is born from simple minutes scattered throughout the day. This is how a sharp mind is built, not through endless hours of forced memorization, but through small, constant rituals of explanation. A little every day, anywhere, always. Now pay very close attention, because this can change the way you deal with procrastination. Whenever you feel stuck, unmotivated to start, use this method as an immediate action trigger. Instead of waiting for the right time to study or work, simply begin by explaining what you need to learn. When you explain out loud, your mind is forced to focus. It can't wander, it can't drift away. You cut through the cycle of procrastination because speaking demands presence. It's impossible to procrastinate while you're producing clarity. And here's a transformative detail. Say out loud phrases that reprogram your mind not to procrastinate. Declare, I act now. I don't postpone. I make it happen. When you hear your own voice, you create a powerful internal command. It's as if your brain is forced to believe it and obey. That's the trick. Don't wait for motivation to act. Create movement, and motivation will follow. As you hear yourself explaining, you generate an immediate sense of progress. You realize you already know something, that you've already advanced. That small step builds confidence, and confidence builds action. Procrastination is born from confusion, from the feeling that something is too big or too difficult. But when you explain, everything breaks down into simple parts. What once seemed like an insurmountable monster suddenly becomes a clear sequence of steps, and in that moment, fear disappears. The great geniuses never waited for inspiration to fall from the sky. They created clarity first, and clarity pulled everything else forward. That's exactly what you must do. Whenever you feel stuck, stop and explain. Teach yourself out loud, even if it's just for 60 seconds. That single minute is enough to break inertia and put you into motion. And once movement begins, procrastination loses its power. You're no longer a hostage to feeling like it because you've already created discipline. Now listen closely, because here's the point that separates the average student from someone who learns in an extraordinary way. The brain truly learns when it recreates. In this process, you discover paths that were never in the book, explanations even the teacher never gave, metaphors that make sense only to you. Knowledge stops being external and becomes something shaped by your own mind. That's why geniuses seem to see the world differently. They don't memorize ready-made formulas. They reinvent, simplify, adapt. They turn every concept into something alive. And when you do this, you learn in a way that is never the same as anyone else, because no one else will ever explain it with the same words you used. Think about it. If you can explain the law of gravity with a falling apple, or explain a math formula using an example from your daily life, it means you've mastered it. You no longer depend on the original way you received the information. You own it. This is how you must learn from now on. Don't copy, recreate. Don't memorize, explain. Don't repeat, transform. That is the mark of great thinkers, and it's what will place you far above average. Now listen with your full attention. If you take this method seriously, if you truly commit to teaching yourself every single day, something extraordinary will happen. You will leap far ahead of most people. While the majority remain stuck in rote memorization, repeating words without understanding, you'll be building real knowledge, solid and unshakable. While others study for hours and forget the next day, you'll learn in minutes and remember forever. While they feel insecure, you'll stand with confidence, clarity, and mastery. That is the power of teaching yourself, the power of simplifying, of recreating, of turning the difficult into the easy. It's what separates those who merely get by from those who become true references. It's what turns an ordinary student into someone brilliant, capable of mastering any subject and applying it in real life. And here's the truth. You don't need to be a genius to learn like a genius. You need discipline, effort, and the courage to practice a method that seems almost too simple to be true. And that's precisely why so few ever use it. But those who do surge ahead. So let me tell you this. Every time you get up and dedicate a few minutes to teaching yourself, you're gaining ground. You're building an advantage that compounds day after day until the world can no longer ignore you. That is the real power of. It's not about storing information in your head. It's about transforming information into clarity, clarity into action, and action into results. Do this, and you will never be the same again. Now I want you to make a pact. Write in the comments, "I choose to learn like a genius." This phrase is your declaration that you will no longer live in the mediocrity of rote memorization, but will transform every study session into clarity, every concept into mastery. And if this lesson resonated with you, subscribe to the channel and hit the like button to keep elevating your learning. And remember, those who teach, learn. Those who simplify, master. Those who practice this every day become unstoppable. What if the reason you can't think clearly has nothing to do with how smart you are? What if overthinking isn't a thinking problem at all? It's a problem of trying to think about thinking while you're already thinking. The brain doesn't work like a library where you can pull out any book at will and examine it carefully. It works more like a stream, and when you try to grab the water to see it better, you disturb the very thing you're trying to observe. Most people believe that more thinking leads to better thinking, that if you just analyze something long enough, turn it over enough times in your mind, you'll finally see it clearly. But there's something peculiar that happens when you do this. The more you think about a problem, the muddier it becomes. Not because the problem is getting harder, but because you're adding layer upon layer of thought on top of the original question. Let's look at what actually happens when someone overthinks. Imagine a student sitting with a mathematics problem. The problem itself might be straightforward. Find the area of a triangle. Simple enough. But watch what happens in the mind. First comes the actual problem. Then comes the thought. Am I doing this right? Then, what if I forget the formula? Then, I always mess these up. Then, why am I so slow at this? Pretty soon, the student isn't working on the mathematics problem anymore. They're working on an entirely different problem, a psychological one, about their own adequacy. And that problem has no solution, because it's not even a real problem. It's just noise. This is what overthinking really is. It's the mind creating secondary problems that have nothing to do with the original question. And here's what makes it particularly troublesome. These secondary problems feel important. They feel like thinking, but they're just interference. Now, the natural question is, how do you stop this? And that's where most people make another mistake. They try to stop overthinking by thinking about how to stop overthinking. They analyze their overthinking. They worry about their worry. And now they've created a third layer of problems on top of the second layer, which was already on top of the first layer. It's like trying to smooth out wrinkles in a bedsheet by crumpling it up more. So what's the alternative? The first principle is surprisingly simple. Separate the question from the questioning. When you look at any problem, whether it's mathematical, practical, or personal, there's the actual problem, and then there's everything you're adding to it. Most of the mental suffering comes from that second part. The actual problem of, how do I solve this equation, is clean. The added parts, what does it mean if I can't? Why is this so hard for me? What will happen if I fail? Those are the parts that create the tangle. Think about what happens when you read a difficult passage in a book. The passage itself has a certain meaning, but as you read, your mind starts generating commentary. This is confusing. I should understand this. Other people probably get this faster. Maybe I'm not smart enough for this material. Notice that none of this commentary helps you understand the passage. It's just noise. The passage remains exactly as difficult or easy as it was before you added all that commentary. The technique is this. When you notice the commentary starting, you don't fight it. You don't try to stop it. You simply see it for what it is. Commentary, not content. It's like watching credits roll at the end of a film. You don't have to do anything with them. You just let them pass. Here's the second principle. The brain clears itself when you give it something real to do. Overthinking happens in a vacuum. When your mind has nothing concrete to work on, it starts working on itself, and that's when you get these endless loops of thought about thought about thought. But give the brain an actual task, something external and specific, and the loops stop. Picture a person lying awake at night, thinking about a conversation they had earlier. Round and round it goes. Did I say the wrong thing? What did they really mean? How should I have responded? This can go on for hours. But now imagine that same person gets up, takes out a piece of paper, and writes down exactly what was said and exactly what they wish they'd said. Suddenly, the thinking becomes productive. It has a direction. It's not overthinking anymore, it's just thinking. The key is specificity. Vague problems generate vague thinking, which generates more vague thinking endlessly. But concrete problems generate concrete thinking, which leads to concrete solutions or concrete conclusions. Even if the conclusion is, I don't know, that's concrete. You can work with that. The third principle is about time and patience. The brain solves problems at its own pace, not at the pace you demand of it. When you try to force understanding, you create pressure. And under pressure, the mind tightens up. It's like trying to remember someone's name at a party. The harder you try, the more it slips away. But the moment you stop trying and move on to something else, the name appears. This doesn't mean being lazy. It means understanding how insight actually works. You can study a problem intensely for an hour, put it aside, and find that the solution appears later while you're doing something completely unrelated, washing dishes, walking, or just staring out a window. This isn't magic. The brain continues working on problems in the background, beneath conscious awareness. But it can only do this when you're not constantly interrupting it with demands for immediate answers. Many students make this mistake. They study for an exam, and when they can't immediately recall something, they panic. They try harder, which creates more panic, which makes recall even harder. But if they simply move to a different question and come back later, the answer they couldn't remember before is suddenly obvious. Nothing changed except the pressure they were applying. Here's the deeper mechanism at work. The mind has two modes of operation. One is focused and deliberate, useful for applying known methods to clear problems. The other is diffuse and associative, useful for making connections, seeing patterns, and finding new approaches. Overthinking happens when you try to use the focused mode for problems that need the diffuse mode, or vice versa. Think of it like vision. When you look directly at something in dim light, it's hard to see. But if you look slightly to the side, letting your peripheral vision catch it, suddenly it's clear. That's because the center of your eye works differently than the periphery. They're built for different tasks. The mind works the same way. Sometimes the direct approach makes things harder to see. You need to look sideways at them. This explains why solutions often come when you're not trying. When you stop the focused effort, the diffuse mode takes over. It's been working all along, but the focused mode was drowning it out, like trying to hear a quiet conversation while shouting. So how do you use this? When you're stuck on something, genuinely stuck, the answer isn't to think harder. It's to think differently. Work on something else. Read about a different subject. Take a walk. Let the problem sit. This feels wrong because we're taught that persistence means constant effort. But real persistence means knowing when to back off and let the deeper processes do their work. Now, let's apply this to some real situations. Suppose you're writing something, an essay, a letter, a report. You write a paragraph, and then you stop. It doesn't sound right, so you rewrite it. Still not right. You rewrite it again. After an hour, you have 6 versions, each slightly different, and you can't tell which is better anymore. This is overthinking in action. What's happening? You've lost the original sense of what you wanted to say. Each rewrite moves a little further from that original intention. And now you're comparing versions without any reference point. The solution isn't to analyze them more carefully. The solution is to step away completely. Go do something else for an hour or a day. When you come back, you'll immediately see which version is clearest, or you'll see that none of them captured what you meant, and you'll write a new version that does. Or consider decision-making. Someone offers you a job, and you need to decide. You make a list of pros and cons. The list is balanced good points on both sides, so you think about it more. You add more items to the list. You weight them differently. You ask friends. You lie awake thinking about it. And the more you think, the less certain you become. This happens because you're trying to reach certainty through analysis alone. But some decisions can't be analyzed into certainty. At some point, you have to recognize that you've gathered the available information, and now you simply need to choose. The overthinking isn't helping you decide. It's just postponing the decision while creating the illusion that you're making progress. Here's a useful technique. Set a specific time limit for deliberation. Give yourself 3 days to think about it. Really think, gather information, consider the angles, but when those 3 days are up, you decide. No more analysis. This forces you to distinguish between productive thinking and wheel spinning. Or take personal worries. Someone says something that bothers you. Maybe a criticism. Maybe just an offhand comment. And you replay it in your mind. What did they mean? Were they attacking you? Should you say something back? What would you say? How would they respond? You're running through entire imaginary conversations, entire scenarios that haven't happened and probably never will. The problem isn't that you're thinking about it. The problem is that you're thinking in circles. There's no new information coming in, you're just recombining the same elements over and over. And each recombination feels slightly different, which tricks you into believing you're making progress, but you're not. You're just stirring the pot. The way out is to recognize this for what it is. Rehearsal without performance. You're practicing something that doesn't need practice. The real conversation, if it happens, won't go the way you're imagining anyway. All this mental rehearsal is just burning energy. What helps? Do something physical. Write the thoughts down and be done with them. Or better yet, do something completely unrelated that requires attention. Fix something, build something, read something challenging. The key is to engage the mind with something that has resistance, something that pushes back, that breaks the loop. Here's what all of this comes down to. Clarity doesn't come from more thinking. It comes from better thinking. And better thinking isn't about quantity or intensity. It's about knowing what kind of thinking serves you and what kind just spins in place. The mind is a remarkable instrument, but like any instrument, it can be used well or poorly. A violin in skilled hands produces music. In unskilled hands, it produces noise. The violin hasn't changed, only the way it's being used. Your mind works the same way. Overthinking is just the noise that happens when you're using the instrument incorrectly. The great liberation is realizing you don't need to control every thought. You don't need to solve every uncertainty. You don't need to know everything before you act. Most of the questions that keep you awake at night aren't real questions. They're just the mind running its commentary program because it has nothing better to do. Give it something better to do. Focus on what's concrete. What do you actually need to figure out? What information do you lack? What step comes next? These are real questions with real answers. Everything else, all the what-ifs, the self-doubt, the imaginary conversations, the endless analysis that's just static. And here's the strange thing. When you stop overthinking, you don't think less. You think better. You think more clearly. Ideas come easier. Solutions appear faster. Not because you're trying harder, but because you're getting out of your own way. The brain knows how to solve problems. It's been doing it long before you learn to second-guess it. Trust it to work. Give it real problems to chew on. Let it move at its own pace. And when it starts spinning its wheels, when you catch yourself in that familiar loop of thought about thought, just notice it. Don't fight it. Just see it for what it is, the mind's way of saying it has nothing productive to do right now. Then give it something productive, or give it nothing at all. Both work better than fighting with your own thoughts. If you found something useful here, there's more to explore. But don't explore it by thinking about what you learned. Explore it by using it. Pick one thing, just one, and try it the next time you catch yourself overthinking. That's all. One thing, one time. See what happens. The understanding comes from doing, not from analyzing the doing. And that might be the most important point of all. What if everything you think you know about learning is wrong? Not just slightly off, but fundamentally backwards. Most people believe that intelligence is something fixed, that the brain has limits you're born with. They think memorizing information is the same as understanding it. They assume that if something feels difficult, they're simply not smart enough. But here's what's fascinating. The brain doesn't work the way most people think it does. There are levels to how the mind operates. Not levels of intelligence in the sense of who's smarter than whom, but levels of how deeply you can engage with any piece of knowledge. And here's the remarkable part. Anyone can move through these levels. It's not about talent or natural ability. It's about understanding how thinking actually works. The problem is that most people never make it past the first level. They stop at the surface, believing they've learned something when they've barely scratched it. And then they wonder why information slips away, why problems that seem similar feel completely new, why knowledge doesn't seem to stick or connect to anything else. Let's talk about what really happens when someone tries to learn something. Picture a student sitting with a textbook on physics, or mathematics, or history. They read through a chapter. The words make sense as they go by. They might even highlight important passages, write notes in the margins. At the end, they feel like they've learned something. They close the book with a sense of accomplishment. But what's actually happened? The information has passed through their eyes, been processed into words, and created a very shallow impression in the mind. It's like running your hand over the surface of water. There's contact, but nothing fundamental has changed. This is the first level, and it's where most people live their entire lives. Reading without engagement, listening without questioning, absorbing information the way a sponge absorbs water, only to have it evaporate just as quickly. The real work begins when you move beyond this surface interaction. And that brings us to what the brain actually needs to build genuine understanding. The first real level of engagement happens when you stop accepting information passively and start testing it, not just nodding along as words flow past, but actively checking whether you actually understand what's being said. This sounds simple, but most people never do it. Here's how you know you're at this level. Close the book. Put down the paper. Now, without looking, can you explain what you just read? Not recite it word for word, but explain the concept in your own language? Most people can't. They realize, suddenly, that while the words made sense as they read them, nothing actually stuck. The ideas didn't transform into understanding. This is what separates passive absorption from active learning. The brain needs to reconstruct information in its own terms to truly hold on to it. When you force yourself to explain something without looking at the source, you're making the brain do real work. You're creating connections, building mental models, translating abstract symbols into concrete understanding. Think about what happens when someone reads a mathematics problem. They see symbols, equations, numbers. If they're at the surface level, they might follow along with the solution, nodding as each step makes sense. But close the book and ask them to solve a similar problem, and they're lost. Why? Because they never forced their brain to actually work through the logic. They watched someone else's thinking without doing any thinking themselves. The second level is where real engagement begins. This is where you take any piece of information and break it down to its simplest possible form, not dumbing it down, but stripping away all the complicated language and fancy terminology to find the core idea underneath. Every complex concept, no matter how sophisticated it seems, can be reduced to simple pieces. The brain understands simple things. It builds up from simple to complex naturally. But when you try to stuff complicated explanations into your head without breaking them down first, you're asking the brain to do something it's not designed for. Here's a test. Can you explain the idea to someone who knows nothing about the subject? Not another expert, not someone who shares your technical vocabulary, but someone completely outside the field? If you can't do that, you don't really understand it yourself. You're just carrying around someone else's complicated explanation. This is harder than it sounds. It requires you to abandon the impressive-sounding language, the technical jargon, the formal definitions. It forces you to confront what you actually understand versus what you've merely memorized. When you try to explain something simply and discover you can't, that's not failure. That's discovering where your understanding has gaps. The brain loves simplicity. It naturally seeks the clearest, most direct path to understanding. But education systems often do the opposite, wrapping simple ideas in layers of complexity, as if difficulty itself signals importance. Strip all that away. Find the simple core. The third level is where things get interesting. This is where you start seeing connections between things that seemed unrelated. The brain doesn't store information in isolated boxes. It builds networks, webs of association where one idea links to another, and another, until everything starts connecting. Think about someone studying physics and music separately. They might never realize that the mathematics of wave equations describes both the motion of particles and the nature of sound. They might never see that rhythm and frequency are the same fundamental concept appearing in different contexts. But once you start looking for connections, they're everywhere. This is how genuine understanding develops. Not by memorizing thousands of separate facts, but by building a connected framework where each new piece of information slots into an existing structure. When you understand something this way, you can't forget it. It's woven into how you think. Here's how to develop this. Whenever you learn something new, ask yourself what else it reminds you of. What other areas use similar principles? What analogies can you draw? The brain is an analogy machine. It understands new things by relating them to things it already knows. Feed that natural tendency. Someone studying biology might notice that natural selection works like market competition. Someone learning about electricity might see parallels with water flowing through pipes. These aren't just clever comparisons. They're how the brain actually builds understanding, by mapping new territory, using familiar landmarks. The fourth level is where you become genuinely dangerous in the best possible way. This is where you stop accepting explanations at face value and start questioning everything. Not skepticism for its own sake, but genuine curiosity about why things work the way they claim to work. The brain learns more from questions than from answers. When you ask a real question, something you genuinely don't understand, your mind becomes alert. It starts actively searching for patterns, testing possibilities, building models. This is the brain's natural state of engagement, but most people never question anything. They accept what they're told, especially if it comes from an authority, a textbook, a respected source. They mistake accepting information for understanding it. Real understanding only comes when you've questioned something deeply enough to see why it must be true, why it couldn't work any other way. Here's what this looks like in practice. Someone tells you a fact. Instead of filing it away, ask why. Why is that true? What would happen if it weren't true? What assumptions are built into that explanation? What evidence supports it? What else would have to be true for this to work? This isn't about being contrary or difficult. It's about engaging with ideas at a level where they actually make sense to you personally. The brain needs to test things, probe them, turn them over, and examine them from different angles. That's how it builds solid understanding rather than fragile memorization. When you question something deeply enough, one of two things happens. Either you find that the explanation holds up under scrutiny, in which case your understanding becomes much stronger, or you find gaps and weaknesses, in which case you've learned something even more valuable, where the explanation breaks down, where the mystery still lies. The fifth level is where everything comes together. This is where you take what you understand and explain it to someone else. Not just recite it, but genuinely teach it in a way that makes sense to another person. There's something almost magical about teaching. When you try to help someone else understand something, you discover aspects of your own understanding you didn't know were there. You find holes you didn't realize existed. You're forced to think about the material in new ways, from new angles, anticipating questions and confusions. The brain reorganizes information when it prepares to teach. It has to. Teaching requires you to model another person's mind, to imagine what they don't know, what will confuse them, what examples will make things clear. This process of mental modeling deepens your own understanding in ways that studying alone never can. Picture someone who's learned to solve a type of math problem. They can work through the steps, get the right answer, but ask them to teach someone else how to solve it, and suddenly they're thinking about it differently. Why does this step come before that one? What's the logic? How would you explain it to someone who's completely lost? In answering those questions, their own understanding transforms. This is why the best way to learn something is to plan to teach it. Even if you never actually teach anyone, the mental preparation, the reorganization of knowledge, the search for clear explanations, all of that does something to how the information sits in your mind. Now, what's actually happening in the brain as you move through these levels? The traditional view of memory is all wrong. People think of memory like a filing cabinet where information gets stored in drawers, retrieved when needed, put back when finished. But that's not how it works at all. Memory is reconstruction. Every time you recall something, you're not pulling out a stored file. You're rebuilding the information from pieces, from associations, from fragments scattered across different networks in the brain. And here's what's crucial. The easier it is to reconstruct something, the better you remember it. That's why passive reading doesn't work. You're not building the connections needed for easy reconstruction. The information passes through without creating the dense web of associations that makes recall natural and effortless. Each level we've talked about builds more connections. Testing yourself forces the brain to practice reconstruction. Simplifying creates clear pathways. Finding connections adds more routes to the same information. Questioning strengthens the logical structure. Teaching forces the most complete reorganization of all. Think of it like this. Imagine trying to remember a path through a forest. If you've walked it once, barely paying attention, you'll struggle to find it again. But if you've walked it many times, from different directions, in different weather, while explaining the route to others, while thinking about why the path goes where it goes, then that path becomes part of the landscape of your mind. You can't get lost because you understand the territory. This is what real learning looks like. Not memorizing routes, but understanding territory. Here's how this works in practice. Say you're trying to understand something difficult, something that seems beyond you. Maybe it's advanced mathematics, or a complex theory, or a technical skill. Most people give up when it feels too hard. But now you have a framework. Start at level 1. Don't just read about it passively. Read a section, then close the book and try to recall it. You'll probably fail. That's fine. That failure is information. It tells you what didn't stick, where your understanding is weak. Move to level 2. Take whatever you could recall and try to explain it as simply as possible. Pretend you're explaining to a child or someone who knows nothing about the field. Where do you struggle? Those are the concepts you don't actually understand yet. Progress to level 3. Look for connections. What does this remind you of? What other fields use similar ideas? What analogies can you draw? Build bridges between this new knowledge and things you already understand solidly. Advance to level 4. Question everything. Why must this be true? What would happen if it weren't? What assumptions are hidden in the explanation? What alternative explanations might exist? Push against the ideas until they either hold firm or reveal their weaknesses. Reach level 5. Prepare to teach it. Write out an explanation as if for someone else. Draw diagrams, think of examples, anticipate confusions. You'll find your understanding deepening with every attempt. The beautiful thing about this approach is that it works for anything. Physics, mathematics, history, language, art, music, any skill or knowledge domain. The levels don't change. The brain's need for active engagement, simplification, connection, questioning, and teaching remains constant. And here's what most people miss. This isn't about working harder. It's about working differently. You could spend 10 hours passively reading and retain almost nothing. Or you could spend 2 hours actively engaging at these deeper levels and build understanding that lasts. The brain doesn't reward time. It rewards engagement. There's something profound here about the nature of understanding itself. Real knowledge isn't something you have. It's something you can do. You understand physics not because you've memorized formulas, but because you can solve problems, make predictions, see connections. You understand history not because you've memorized dates, but because you can explain why events unfolded as they did, what forces were at play. Understanding is active. It's a capability, not a possession. That's why these levels matter so much. They transform knowledge from dead information into living capability. They change you from someone who's heard about ideas into someone who can think with those ideas, who can use them, extend them, apply them in new contexts. The mind isn't a container to be filled. It's a fire to be lit. And these levels, these ways of engaging with knowledge, they're the kindling that makes that fire burn bright. So here's what you need to do. Pick something you want to understand, something that matters to you. It doesn't have to be academic. It could be how engines work, or how to play an instrument, or understanding people better. Whatever it is, commit to engaging with it differently. Don't just read about it. Test yourself, simplify it, find connections, question it, prepare to teach it. Move through each level deliberately. Watch what happens to your understanding. You'll notice something strange. The more you engage this way, the easier it becomes. Your brain adapts. It starts automatically looking for connections, asking questions, building models. These levels become natural rather than forced. Understanding stops being something you struggle toward and becomes something you build naturally. That's when you realize the truth about the brain's power. It's not limited by capacity. It's limited by how you engage it. Give it passive absorption, and it stays dormant. Give it active engagement, and it becomes something extraordinary.
The choice has always been yours.